Okay, so hello everyone, all 0 of you. We're live with the one and only Michael. I say that every time when I'm chatting with someone, I'll say the one and only. And it's especially bad I said that with David Friedman, and there are 5 David Friedmans, which makes it very confusing to Google him. So in that case, it was really bad. But I think if you Google Michael Huemer, you will get this Michael Huemer. So
I don't know of any other.
Yeah. So I guess we're going to be talking about whether there's a perfect God. So we're both kind of agnostics. We're both around 50-50, I think, on whether there's a God. But Michael Huemer thinks that basically it's a limited God. So it is limited in either power or goodness or something. And I think that if there is a God, it's probably unlimited. And so I think we're going to be arguing about that.
Okay. And we might also talk about whether there is such a being at all.
But, yeah. So I guess I prepared a slideshow. I think you have as well. Do you want to go first, or should I? Maybe we should have talked about that prior to.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't have a slideshow, but you could go first. Yeah. Okay. I didn't prepare that much.
Wow.
Because I figured this would be more informal.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this will be around 10 minutes. Starting on the wrong slide. Okay, so Mike and I were both agnostics. We agree that it's plausible that there is a creator of some sort, though we think there also might not be. But I think if the creator is real, it's almost certainly perfect in that it's all powerful, all good, and all knowing. And so I'll explain why I think that's the most plausible view. The first argument is that a perfect being has a much higher prior probability. So the prior probability of a theory, it's how likely a theory is before you assess the evidence. So the theory that the universe was made in 1978, that can explain all the data just as well as the theory that the universe arose at the Big Bang, but it's a bad theory because it has a lower prior probability. And prior probability is very important. There are an infinite number of the ways that the world could be. So because of this, unless some view has a special claim to having a very high prior probability, its prior probability will be super low. Given that there are infinite possible ways the world could be, the average prior probability of a theory will be 0. And so you have to have sort of a good reason to think something has a high prior probability. And the consideration of prior probability alone, this is enough to kill a theory, even if it explains lots of data. So the theory that a pixie rigs a deck of poker cards to get the specific result that one in fact gets in poker, it explains the data. And in fact, the data is going to be very unlikely on an alternative hypotheses. But because it's so odd and specific, it has a lower prior probability, and thus will have a vanishingly low overall probability. So my claim is that a perfect being has a much higher prior probability than a limited being for a few reasons. The first one is it's very simple. So it says there's just one fundamental property, which is, perfection. Or another property, or you can say that its fundamental property is unlimited goodness, or its fundamental property can be unlimited power. I think you can get a perfect being from all of these. So if you think it's good beyond without limit, that would be involved being perfect. And if it has unlimited power, then it would have the power to know all things, and so then it would have a deep knowledge of the moral facts and find them motivating. So in contrast, a God with limited power will have to posit many properties. You'll have to specify how much power it has, how good it is, how much knowledge it has, why it has the conscious states it does. And so positing one property is better and simpler. A second reason to think that a perfect being has a high prior probability is that it lacks arbitrary limits. So arbitrary limits are bad. So you should assume that space is unlimited, or that there's no speed of light, unless you're given a reason to think there is a speed of light or there's a limit on space. You shouldn't just think space stops for no reason. And so we all agree that the creator, if it exists, is somewhat good, it's somewhat powerful, and it's somewhat knowledgeable. And so just saying that there are arbitrary limits on it, that's not a good theory. It's sort of like positing that there's a random patch of space that doesn't follow the same laws of physics. And the reason why that's a bad theory is because it involves sort of arbitrary cutouts. It's like, why would this patch not follow the same laws of physics? But the same thing is true of a limited God. Why would it have this particular limited property? And so I think, positing that it's unlimited is a better theory. A third reason that's more probable is that it is, it's just more inherently probable. So something is inherently probable if just when you think about it, it just kind of seems likely. It just seems like the way reality can be. When I think about an unlimited God, that just sort of seems like the way that fundamental reality could be. And this is true of a lot of people, including very good philosophers. And so, it just sort of like seems like a plausible view, which makes it more likely. And then the fourth and final reason, or maybe there's a fifth, I don't remember, that God has a high intrinsic probability is that it might be provable. So there are various ways that people have attempted to prove that God is necessary. Gödel had an ontological argument that has been expanded upon by other people. There's the argument from modal limits, various other proofs that might prove that just like God can be deduced as a law of logic, essentially, or it can be deduced from logic alone. Now, I don't know if any of these work, but it's not like super obvious that none of them work. And so if you think that there's a 1% chance that one of them exists, then the prior probability won't be too much below 1%. And then the fifth reason why theism has a higher prior probability is the contingency argument. So I think the contingency argument is pretty plausible, and it establishes that, there might be something necessary, which would be God. And so God must have a decent prior probability, because even before the facts about the world, just like it might be, there's a decent chance that there's a necessary God. So the contingency argument, as I'm describing it, is the first premise is everything has a sufficient explanation of its existence. I'll defend this more on the next slide. From this, it follows that there's some necessary explanation of all of contingent reality. So contingent reality is the stuff that could have been all the stuff that could have been otherwise, there's some explanation for it that can't be otherwise. Third is whatever this explanation is, it must be able to bring about all possible worlds, because nothing else could bring them about. So if something needs a sufficient explanation for it, and there's a necessary thing, then the necessary thing would have to bring about all possible worlds. So any world that's possible will have to be able to be brought about by the necessary thing. But if the necessary thing can bring about all possible worlds, it has to be omnipotent, because omnipotence just is the ability to bring about all possible worlds. And so if it's omnipotent, then it's unlimited in power. And because of the argument I described before, an omnipotent being will necessarily be God. So to illustrate this, imagine you like Graham Hoppe has a view where he thinks that essentially like the fundamental thing is just the initial singularity. He thinks that that's sort of like causally fundamental. Now, I don't think this view is very plausible, but if you have a view like this, then you would think that laws of physics different from our own are metaphysically impossible. My claim is that theism is the only view on which there's something necessary, but you get a modal domain as robust as the one we think exists. Okay, and why think everything has an explanation of its existence? Why I think the first premise is true? First, because it's intuitive. It's like, we kind of normally think things need explanations. And so any theory that says everything has an explanation is going to be a better theory. When I just think about it, it seems plausible. And second, we all accept that the things that are in our experience need explanations. So, if you see a potato, you won't think that the potato just began uncaused for no reason. So, if that's true, then we accept things in our experience need explanations. And my claim is that there's no non-arbitrary way to limit the causal principle to things just in our experience. So there's no way to say only things in our experience need explanations without arbitrarily limiting the principle. So, if you said only things in, California need explanations, that would be a bad theory. And my claim is that any principle that says that only things in our explanation need only things in our experience need explanations will be a similarly bad theory, in that it'll be arbitrary and have other problems. And so, okay, what does this argument establish? I don't think either stage is like super obviously true, but they're not obviously wrong. And so even if you think both stages have like a 10% chance of working, then that means that the prior probability will be like around 1%. Maybe it'll be a little bit lower if you think there are a priori arguments against God, but it'll be kind of like around 1%. Those arguments won't establish that theism is like, the prior probability of a perfect being is like 1 in a million or something. Yeah. So okay. So I think that's the first argument in terms of prior probability. The second argument for why we should posit an unlimited God is there's moral knowledge. So I think you have some moral knowledge. So it's wrong to torture people. And even if you're one of those ghoulish nihilists who doesn't think you have moral knowledge, and you don't think that it's wrong to torture people, you still think that there's some a priori knowledge. So if you trust induction, you'll have to think that worlds where induction works are more inherently likely than ones that don't. Mike actually has a good paper on this, where it's about like there is no pure a priori reasoning, I think it's called, or there's no pure empirical reasoning. And how do we know about morality? Well, we know about morality through intuition. We sort of think about things. We have seemings that moral claims seem plausible, and that's how we come to moral beliefs. But here's why it's hard to have moral knowledge if there isn't a perfect God who designs our brains to have moral knowledge. So suppose that the reason that you believe something has nothing to do with it being the case. So I think that the fuel tank in my car is full because I see it being full, but then I realize that it's just a sticker on my car, and it's totally unrelated to whether it's actually full. Well, then that undermines my justification for inferring that it's full based on that. But the moral facts are not in the business of moving around atoms in your brain. That they can't do that. And so in order for the moral facts to explain our beliefs, there has to be some non-physical faculty for grasping the moral truths. That's not reducible to just like the goings on of atoms in our brain, because then there would be no connection between the moral truths and our grasp of them. But I think positing that there's a perfect being explains why we would have that. It's valuable for there to be for us to have moral knowledge and the ability to directly grasp moral truths, and not just moral truths, also mathematical and modal and truths about which worlds are more likely and so on. And so if you think that the God is powerful enough to like design the psychophysical laws specifically so that we're able to have advanced moral knowledge, then I think that at least shows that it's like very powerful and is able to do a lot. And so maybe that should increase, if it's designing the moral laws, that should increase the odds that it's, or not designing the moral laws, sorry, but designing the psychophysical laws so that we can know morality, that at least increases the odds that it's perfect. And it also is easier to see how a perfect God would have moral knowledge than how a limited God would, right? So if God is perfect, then he would have moral knowledge just on account of being omniscient. But for a limited God, you just have to posit sort of brutally that it has moral knowledge, which makes the theory worse. Okay, the third argument is psychophysical harmony. So we both agree that dualism is true. Even if you don't agree that dualism is true, the argument still works, probably, but it gets harder to explain unless you're a type A physicalist, but that view is crazy, so you shouldn't be a type A physicalist. And so if dualism is true, then there's no necessary pairing between the mind and the body. So, there are certain conscious states, and they give rise to certain physical states, and certain physical states give rise to certain non-physical states. But there's no necessary pairing between them. So for instance, you could have a world where with all the same that's physically identical to ours, but where like there's no consciousness. Or maybe you could have a world where like just every being in the universe has a conscious experience of like eating soup, but the world's physically identical to ours. And so if that's true, then it's very inexplicable why, out of all the possible pairings between mind and body, there happens to be this harmonious pairing. So, when we think consciously, I'd like my arm to go up, my arm goes up rather than, there just being some totally disconnected way of things happening. And in particular, this is particularly hard to explain for the limited God. So if there's a limited God, then it'll have a mind and it'll have certain causal effects. But there's no necessary pairing between the mind and the causal effects. So it's very possible that the causal effects would just be totally disconnected from its mind, and so then it couldn't design anything. And so if you just posit at the fundamental core of reality a limited mind, then that doesn't explain psychophysical harmony, because it just posits brutally that there's this pairing between mind and body. In contrast, if you think there's a perfect being, because it's perfect, its will would necessarily be perfectly efficaciously implemented, and so that would explain psychophysical harmony. And then the last argument is the anthropic argument. This is an argument I'm working on a paper on. Many people are calling it the greatest argument for perfect being theism, perhaps of all time. So the basic idea is this. So David Lewis proved that there are a lot of people. There are Beth2 possible people. Beth2 is a big number. It's a very large infinite. So Aleph null is the smallest infinity. Beth1 is bigger than that, and Beth2 is bigger than that. So suppose that there are only finite people that exist. So suppose that the number of people that exist is like a billion. Well, a billion out of the uncountably infinite people exist. So the odds I'd be one of the lucky ones would be 0. So therefore, the fact that I exist confirms that there are Beth2 people, because on the hypothesis that there are Beth2 people, it's, the odds I would exist would be very high, perhaps 1. 1 if everyone's created, and very high if not everyone's created. And so, the fact that I exist gives good reason to think there are uncountably infinite people. But if there's a limited God, it's way less likely that there would be Beth2 people. And it becomes very hard to see, like, if this God's powerful enough to make the psychophysical laws in a developed way, and is powerful enough to create all possible people, uncountably infinite of them, then it has to be like really, really enormously powerful. And so then it's better to just think it's unlimited. One contrast, if the God is unlimited, it would make all Beth2 people, all Beth2 possible people, because it's good to create someone. And so it would create all the possible people, because if you give someone if you create someone who lives a good life, then that's a good thing, because it's good. Happiness is good. It's good to add happiness to the world. And so a perfect being would make all Beth2 people. And so the claim is just that the existence of Beth2 people, which we confirm through thinking about anthropics, is much better explained by an unlimited God than by a limited God. So I guess, so that's the last argument. Okay, so done for now. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so I'm afraid I didn't prepare a slideshow or anything fancy like that. Figured I would just listen to what you said and then respond to it. But okay, so a couple of things. Maybe for the audience, we should say something about. Well, you said something about why you would believe in God, but I'll say something about what I think is the best argument for some kind of intelligent design. So, and by intelligent design, I mean that some intelligent being maybe created the universe, and so that being might be a God or it might not be a God. So if it's imperfect, then you might think that it doesn't count as God, but it still counts as a creator. Okay, so I think the best argument for this is the fine-tuning argument. And so roughly speaking, people say there are certain parameters of the universe that have to have very specific values in order for life to be possible. And by parameters of the universe, I'm talking about things like there's the gravitational constant, or there's the mass of the proton, or there's the ratio of the gravitational to the electromagnetic force. And okay, so there are all these things that are sort of fundamental constants of the universe or something. And then, just like a bunch of scientists have figured out that if you imagine modifying, there's several parameters that if you imagine modifying them even slightly relative to their current values, there's some reason why life would be impossible. Okay, so like if the gravitational constant were a little bit stronger, then maybe the universe would have recollapsed, shortly after the Big Bang and long before stars formed. Okay, and then if the constant were a little bit smaller, then maybe the universe would have expanded too quickly for stars to ever form, and then there would be no life. Okay, and by the way, these things are they're pretty robust, pretty fundamental requirements. So, some of them are, if you change this constant, then it results that there are no stable elements heavier than hydrogen or something like that, and nobody thinks that there could be life made out of hydrogen. Okay, so you're like, wow, so then it's really weird that there's life. Right. So if the requirements for life are so specific, then it's weird that there's life. So an explanation is maybe there's an intelligent designer. Okay. Now, the leading alternative explanation is the multiverse, which is there are many universes which all have different values of the parameters, and it just happens that obviously the only observers are in the ones where the parameters happen to allow for life. So all of those observers look around and they see those life permitting parameters, and they're like, wow, that's cool. Okay, all right, but it's not a huge coincidence, because maybe a whole bunch of different values are realized. Okay, all right, now, so that was like the best argument for some kind of intelligent design. And all right, so I won't talk about the objection to that, but we could do that later if we want. The best argument against against theism is the problem of evil, which is it looks like there's a bunch of bad stuff, right? And but in the word evil and the problem of evil just refers to anything that's bad. Okay, it doesn't refer specifically to people who are immoral, right? So anything bad that happens is part of the problem of evil. It seems like if there was a perfect being, then the world would be perfect or something like that, right? So here's a version of there's a couple of versions of the argument, right? One is, well, if you were a perfect being, then you would only create perfect things, right? So if you were all powerful, then you could create the best possible thing. Anything that you created, you could make it as good as possible. And if you were perfectly good, then you would want to make the best thing that you could make. And of course, if you are all knowing, then you would know what the best thing was. So whenever you made something, you would always make the best thing, the best logically possible thing. It doesn't appear that this world is the best possible world. So it appears that this world was not created by a perfect being. Okay. Another version of it is, you're just trying to explain why bad things exist. And you're like, okay, well, is God not aware of all the bad stuff that's going on in the world? Then he's not all knowing. Is he aware of it, but he just doesn't care? He just doesn't want to stop bad things? Okay, then he's not perfectly good. Or is he aware of it and he wants to stop it, but he's unable to? Powerful. But if he's aware of all of the evils and he's both willing and able to stop them, then how could they possibly exist? Okay, and now, so the limited creator idea avoids this, possibly because, maybe the creator is unable to stop all of the bad things. And, so you can't say that for the perfect creator, but you could say that for a limited creator. Now, you might think, oh, but, if the being is even very powerful, it should be able to stop most of the bad things. And when you look around, you see a lot of bad stuff happening that, you just don't even see the creator intervening at all. You don't see the creator even attempting to stop them, right? So, I don't know, there's this Israel-Hamas war going on, and if there's a creator powerful enough to create a universe, they could probably stop that war, right? And they don't even appear to be attempting to stop it or anything. You can see people who seem to be doing a lot more good, like Bill Gates has saved millions of lives with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? Where's God? Why isn't he doing that? Why doesn't he at least contribute $1 billion to that or something? So, okay, but my response to that is, actually, do you know how big the universe is? It's pretty big. So there are 10 to the 22 stars, which is 10,000 millions of stars. So if you had 10 to the 22 stars to worry about, we might not see you around much either, right? It's you try creating a universe sometime, and with 10 to the 22 stars, try to fix the problems around in the universe, right? By the way, we don't know what exactly it takes to create a universe. Making things go well in the universe once it's created might be a lot harder than creating a universe. So, okay. All right, what else? Okay, so the limited creator, I think, explains the fine tuning and avoids the problem of evil. I'm going to say something about your arguments, Matt. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Are we doing okay on that?
I think you've probably talked for 6 or 7 minutes or something. Or I don't know.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's see how many things I get to. I don't know. So, what's the prior probability of a perfect being? That was an initial question that came up. My initial thought was, well, it's infinitesimal compared to the probability of a non-perfect being. And why is that? Because, you'd mentioned that the prior probability of a hypothesis has to do with its degree of specificity. And so the more specific a hypothesis is, the lower its prior. The perfection hypothesis is maximally specific. So you've tied down the degree of power and the degree of knowledge and the degree of goodness to one specific point. Okay, and then the hypothesis of a merely very powerful creator, that's a range of possibilities, right? And so it's sort of if you have a variable that can go between 0 and 1 and it's continuous, right? Between 0 and 1 inclusive, the probability that its value is exactly 1 is 0, right? If you pick any particular point, the probability of that is 0. But if you pick a range of points, like I say, well, it's over 0.5, then that has a non-zero probability. So it's infinitely greater. What about the simplicity of the perfection hypothesis? I wasn't convinced that that's a perfectly simple, that perfection is a perfectly simple idea. Because I think it might be that, perfection is just a conjunction of perfections in various different dimensions. So it might be complex. Okay, let's see what else. So I took notes on some of these. Oh, I don't like the principle of sufficient reason. So we think the principle of sufficient reason is false. I think it has a consequence that there are no modal distinctions. And I got this argument from Peter van Inwagen a long time ago, but I don't remember exactly where. I think it's in his book on free will. That principle of sufficient reason entails collapse of all modal distinctions. Why? Okay, so we take it that I take it that the principle is any contingent proposition requires an explanation, and maybe necessary truths don't require an explanation. I hope that's it, because I don't know how to explain some of the necessary truths. Okay, so let's say there's a contingent truth, call it C. It's got an explanation. If the explanation is another contingent truth, then you need an explanation for that. And if that's another contingent truth, you need another explanation for that. And then there's going to be an infinite regress. But even if there's an infinite regress, you're still not done, because then you have to have an explanation for the entire infinite series. Okay, and so ultimately it's going to have to be that all the contingent truths get explained by a necessary truth. Okay, but now you think about the nature of explanation, and like a common account of explanation is, well, you have an explanation when the explanans entails the explanandum. But if something is entailed by a necessary truth, then it is a necessary truth, right? So like on that account of explanation, the PSR entails that everything is a necessary truth. Okay, now you might think, oh no, maybe there could be explanations where the explanand doesn't entail the explananda, maybe it just raises the probability. Okay, but then I think you would just have like another contingent proposition that would require an explanation. So like, if A explains B but doesn't entail B, then there's some kind of gap between A and B, and then you could formulate a contingent proposition which says, if A, then B, or something like that. And then you need an explanation of that. Since that's contingent, that needs to be explained by a necessary truth. And there's going to be another infinite regress until, you're not going to be able to complete the explanations unless you turn it into an entailment. Okay, and then I think, you shouldn't accept the collapse of modal distinctions, because you know what, like we never would have even formulated this distinction between contingent and necessary truths if we didn't think, like we wouldn't have formed the concept of necessity if we didn't think there was a distinction between contingent truths and necessary truths, and that some things were contingent. And like, if you tell me that the paradigm examples that people give when they're explaining the idea of a contingent truth are not actually contingent, then I think, oh, okay, well then, like I don't have a grasp on the concept. Okay, what about, let's see, there was an argument for moral knowledge, that the existence of God could explain why we have the faculty of ethical intuition, let's call it. That could be explained by a merely good being, but not a perfect being. It could be a creator who, they don't have to be all powerful or perfect. There was the anthropic argument that, okay, so the last argument about how there are Beth2 possible people. And so God must have created Beth2 possible people. Otherwise, it's super unlikely that I would exist. So if he created a lower infinity of people, or he only created a finite number of people, then the probability that I would have been one of the people created would be 0. Basically, I disagree with the first step of that there are Beth2 possible people. Now, I don't know how many possible people there are, or how many people there could have been, or something, whatever is the way to phrase that. But I don't think that David Lewis proved that it was Beth2. So I think Lewis gave an argument that there are Beth2 possible worlds, but I don't see how you get Beth2 possible people from that. Okay, so like there could be one, well, okay, there's 8 billion people in the actual world, right? Let's say, well, it could be that there's only 8 billion possible people. And that's consistent with there being Beth2 possible worlds, right? So it could just be, it could just be the same people in all those worlds. Okay, now if you accept David Lewis's framework of modal realism, then it's Beth2 individuals, because in his view, the people in other possible worlds are never the same people. Like 2 different possible worlds just contain token distinct individuals. And the you in another possible world isn't literally you, it's only a counterpart of you, whatever, okay? But in my view, that's just a total non-starter. Like Lewis's modal realism, I think, is just completely insane. Okay, so the me in another possible world is literally me. It's just like a different way that I could have been. Okay, so there could be whatever, it could be any number of possible worlds, and the people in those worlds could all be me. Okay, now you might think, oh well, no, because like I could imagine a possible world in which there are infinitely many people, because I can coherently conceive that or something, or maybe I just have an intuition that it's possible. Okay, we think that it's possible, and so then it must be that there's at least an infinite number of possible people. Yeah, I'm not sure that's true. So I think so. You might think that you can imagine the infinitely many possible people, but I think it might be that that's just not really possible. Okay, and then you might think, oh, but like it's even feasible for us to create unlimited numbers of additional people. Like if there's only finitely many possible people, then what happens when you get to that limit and then you have another child? Then what happens, right? And then I think what would happen is the other child would be another instance of one of the existing people. That is, they would be a person who had two bodies after that point. Okay, all right, but never mind that. Maybe there's infinitely many possible people, but it's only Aleph null, right? Which I guess I find a reasonable possibility, right? It's either Aleph null or it's a finite number. Okay, and so and then all the other possible worlds where there are other people, there's more than continuum many other possible worlds, but they just have the same Aleph null people in them.
I think you're probably at around 15 minutes.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, good. So, all right. So that was the last argument that you talked about. So that's a good place to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you and I agree on a lot. I agree that the fine-tuning argument is like a really good argument, and lots of the things people say in response are false. Basically, all with the exception of there being a multiverse that explains it. Though, yeah. I mean, you and I, we disagree about whether a multiverse, assuming there aren't souls, commits the fallacy of understated evidence. But and for people who are interested, I have an article talking about why Mike's wrong about that. But maybe that would be a little far afield. So I guess, I mean, so one thing we could talk about. So you suggest that a perfect being has an infinitesimal prior because it's very specific. But I think there are lots of very specific hypotheses where we accept that they have a much higher intrinsic prior than like all the other less specific hypotheses. So, for instance, I agreed modal realism is crazy, but modal realism is way more plausible than modal realism minus a random one of the worlds, even though there are infinite permutations of modal realism minus a random one of the worlds.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean that might be okay. Yeah. I mean, at first I thought you might just list something that's a necessary truth, right? Like 2 + 2 = 4 is more probable than 2 + 2 is greater than 4, right? And there's an infinite range of other numbers you could say that 2 + 2 is, but still more likely that it's 4, right? But that's because it's 100% likely that it's 4. But okay, but in the case of modal realism, modal realism, I guess, is a necessary falsehood.
Yeah,
but it's still more plausible than all these other necessary falsehoods where you remove one.
Yeah, or like here's another example. Like the odds. That's maybe a better example. And Dustin Crummett gives this example that like the odds that the laws of physics are perfectly uniform is way more likely than the odds that there's a random patch that deviates somewhere random in the universe that deviates from the laws of physics and just like follows a different one. Even though the hypothesis that there is a random patch, it's way more modest. There are huge numbers of the universe has many patches. It could be any of those patches and deviate from the laws of physics in any way. And yet, nonetheless, that's way less likely than the hypothesis that the laws of physics are perfectly uniform. And so I think that the reason for that is going to be is relatively similar to the reason why a perfect being is more plausible, namely that it's simpler, that it sort of lacks these arbitrary limits. It doesn't raise the question of like, why would it have these laws in this patch rather than some other thing? Where similarly with the limited GOTS, like why would it have this amount of powers and stuff?
Oh yeah, well, yeah. Why am I not worried by the arbitrary limits? I don't know. I just think that it's just one of these brute facts. there's a being and it has some amount of power. And if it was maximally, if it has the maximal degree, I think that's also arbitrary. Like I don't, is there a reason why it's that instead of a little bit less? I don't know.
I don't think it's arbitrary if it's maximal. I mean, so for instance, if the speed of light was like 300 and like with, take the speed of light. If the speed of light is like some specific range, I don't actually know exactly what it is, but let's say it's 1 billion miles per hour. I might be off by many orders of magnitude. I probably am, but like, if that just were a brute fact with no explanation, that would be much less weird than thinking that the speed of light was unlimited, or thinking that the total size of the universe, that the universe just stopped after 10 to the power of 20 feet being that long. That would be really weird. While the hypothesis that it's just infinite in size is much less strange because it's unlimited.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the size of the universe, it just seems like it couldn't have an end. There couldn't be an edge of space. There could be an end of like the matter that's in the universe. So like maybe that's a better example. Like somebody says, "Oh, well, there could be like an infinite amount of material, or there could be a finite amount." And then I go, I'm not sure that the infinite amount counts as a specific, as a maximally specific point, right? Because it's sort of indefinite. It's sort of like it's not really a number. But anyway, okay.
But I think the same thing is broadly true of an unlimited God, where it's like it is sort of indefinite in a similar way, where it's not like there's some power score where like every being has it, where like mine is like 58 and like little old ladies is only like 31 and God's is infinity. It's that maximum perfection just involves being able to do for any x, being able to do that if x is some is metaphysically possible, and being perfectly good.
Well, okay, but I was going to say, if somebody says, "Oh, maybe the universe is finite," not in the sense of there's an edge of space, but in the sense that there's only finite material. And then you're like, "Oh, okay, well, why is it this amount of stuff rather than another?" Then I just, well, this is just a brute fact. There are contingent truths in the world. It had to be some amount. It was going to be whatever it is, whatever the amount it is. That doesn't seem like super unlikely or anything to me. So,
yeah, I guess, I mean, to me, it seems more likely, like if there's an edge of space, you'd look for an explanation of that. It seems weird that there would just be an arbitrary, unexplained stopping point where it just stops there for no further reason. Now, like,
I mean, like my problem.
Some things obtain with no further reason, but just like positing that more stuff obtains without reason seems like a cost to the theory.
Oh yeah. So I mean, if somebody said there was an edge of space, like I don't think my problem is that it would be arbitrary where the.
Sorry, I should have said an edge of matter, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that a cost of the theory? I don't know. I don't think that much in terms of costs of theories. I guess we'll start talking about that. I feel like no, we shouldn't be bargaining about theories or whatever. I just think about, well, is it implausible that that's the case? And then I feel like no, it's not particularly implausible. So
I think it's less likely than the alternative, all else equal.
Yeah. I'm not sure that that's the case, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess what do you make of the modal realism example? Where like modal realism is obviously ridiculous, but it's way better than modal realism minus a random one world. Where perfect being theism, I mean, maybe you think it's very improbable, but it's clearly better to think that God has all the powers, or has all the powers and knowledge and so on, than has all of that, except he just doesn't know like one random fact, like what like 605 squared is or something. Like that's a way worse theory than.
That would be worse because his knowing the squares of all the other numbers is strong evidence for his knowing what 605 squared is. Right? Yeah. So sort of like some of the theory would be inductive evidence against this other part of it.
I mean, the claim is just that a God who knows all things is more probable than a God who knows all things except one. And there are infinite permutations of God who knows all things except one, and yet it's still going to be a ridiculous theory because.
Yes, it would be weird for him to just not know one of these things. Right. But it wouldn't be weird for there to be a God who's very knowledgeable, but not all knowing. Right. So it's right. Like if you just like take one fact out and there's nothing special about that fact, it's not like harder to know than any of the other facts, yeah, then it's really unlikely, right? Okay, but anyway, the other thing I wanted to say was, yeah, I'm not sure that omnipotence is even possible, right? So I think these infinite characteristics that God is supposed to have might be metaphysically impossible. These might be impossible infinities. So can there be a being who has maximal power? I think that might be like an infinite intensive magnitude. That's impossible. So there could be any degree of power, but it can't be infinite, which is analogous to the idea that there are numbers that get larger and larger. They just go up forever, but there isn't one that's larger than all the other numbers, right? Like, for every natural number, there's another one larger than it. That's true, but there isn't one that's larger than all the others. Okay, and so like that's analogous to the idea that, well, there could be a being with any degree of power, but it couldn't be infinite power. Anyway, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I disagree on two counts. The first one is I lean toward the view that it's possible to have infinite intensive magnitudes. I don't have a super well worked out theory of infinity, but I mean, that's a much longer discussion. But I think maybe like causal finitism or something is kind of plausible, or like I don't know. I don't have a super well worked out thoughts, but that view about the infinite is very controversial. And while I think it's somewhat plausible, it's not obvious. And then I also don't think omnipotence is an infinite intensive magnitude for the reason I described before. It's not like power is like, like you assign power points and then you compare them. Omnipotence just means the ability to do anything that you want. And that seems like an infinite intensive magnitude, or sorry, an infinite extensive magnitude. It's just like the things you want to do, you can do them if they're possible.
Yeah. Okay. Can there be a being that? Well, so I guess my thought is, what? Like, you can't just have causal powers as a fundamental property. Like, your causal properties have to supervene on and be grounded in your descriptive characteristics. And so, to have the ability to do anything, it must have some descriptive characteristics, which, according to the causal laws, would make any outcome possible. And then, I just doubt that it's possible to have. I doubt that there's any set of descriptive characteristics you could have that would ground causal powers to bring about any outcome, right?
Well, wait. So what's wrong with thinking that there's just the law is like? Well, so I think that it makes sense to think of God as having causal powers rather than there being laws. I don't have a super well worked out view on the philosophy of what exactly laws are and whether they're just summaries of causal powers. But I definitely think if there's a God, it's not like thinking about it as there being some external law that gives it its power is the wrong way of thinking about it. But even if that is right, why not just think that it's causal power? Either it's causal power or the law is just this being can do whatever it wants.
Can that be a law? I think the laws can't contain reference to a specific individual. I think they have to connect qualitative properties. So why? I don't know. I guess I think it's an intuitive metaphysical principle that causal powers are grounded in descriptive features of things, and your hexaity doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a strange way of thinking about it, where I think you shouldn't think of God as there being like some external law that applies to God. You should just think of it as like God has certain causal powers. And one of the causal powers he has is he can do whatever he wants.
Well, so, yeah, when am I thinking about laws? Well, so to be clear, a law is not like another object with its own causal powers, right? It's just a proposition that correctly describes the causal powers of other things. And more specifically, correctly describes the relationship between descriptive features of things and causal features. So like, F equals ma describes the causal powers that forces have. And okay. And so like I'm not proposing that the laws would be restricting God. It would just be correctly describing.
Okay. So it's just describing his causal powers. Okay, well, yeah. So I think he could have the causal power to do whatever he wants, and the laws describe that.
Yeah, I mean, my claim is like his causal powers would have to be grounded in something else, like his descriptive non-causal features, his categorical features, as they say, right? That is non-causal features. And so, so like think about other examples of causation, right? Like, okay, so if I have the ability to lift weights of a certain amount, and what's that explained by? I don't know, like the size of my muscles or the amount of energy that's in the muscles or something like that.
For me, it's a very great weight.
Yeah. Okay, and for me, maybe smaller weight. Anyway, yeah, okay, and so, like, I don't know, there's a certain amount of chemical energy stored in the muscles, right? And like the amount of weight that I can lift is related to how much chemical energy is stored in there. So, in order for me to be able to lift heavier weights, there has to be more energy. For me to be able to lift any weight whatsoever, I have to have an infinite amount of energy in the muscles, right? And so,
Yeah, so I think that's true of non-fundamental causal powers. So your causal powers to like lift weights are grounded in certain facts about atoms and chemical energy and so on, where it's like those are what explains why you have that causal power. But for the fundamental causal powers, well, they don't seem to have to be grounded in some extra property, where it's just like what is the extra property that grounds atoms? The fact that atoms, pull on each other or whatever, according to the law of gravity. Like I think they just have that power.
Oh, well, I mean, what grounds the gravitational attraction is mass, right?
Okay, well, what grounds the fact that mass is attractive in the way described by gravity?
Yeah, nothing grounds that. So, right, yeah. So a descriptive feature has a certain causal feature, and then there's nothing that grounds the fact that it has that causal feature, because then you're on infinite regress territory there, right? But
I think there's fundamental stuff, and it has certain powers, and then those powers will have certain effects that
yeah.
And so I think on theism there's one fundamental thing. His name's God, and he has the power to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, well, so I'm claiming, well, he has to have some qualitative categorical features that are the supervenient space for that power, right? This is not normally discussed, because usually people don't discuss why God would have the powers that he does. They just assume that he would. Even atheists, usually just assume, whatever, you can just. But okay, and then if you think about the way causal powers usually work, so like having greater effects requires increasing the magnitude of whatever descriptive feature, whatever categorical feature that grounds the causal powers. So, right. So to increase the gravitational force, you have to increase the mass, and to get infinite gravitational attraction, you have to have infinite mass. And that's not just it's not just that case. It's like think about any other example of causal powers. Right. And it looks like in order to get unlimited causal powers, you have to have like an infinite categorical descriptive property.
Yeah. Well, so I think we have different views about the powers, where it's like, so I mean, I think so. There's going to be something like a particle with mass, and then there's going to be some further fact, which is it has the power to exert force on other things. So there will be what it is, and then what it does. And what it does is not just what it is, because you could imagine a world where you have the same atoms that you had at the beginning of the universe, or but they just sort of sit there and don't do anything. And so then I think what theism says is there's this perfect being that what it is God, and what it does is whatever it wants.
Well, so you might be proposing that the underlying feature that grounds the causal powers is the property of being God. Right? But I'm not sure that counts as a qualitative property.
My claim is that that's not even the right way of thinking about it. So my claim is that the way to think about it is that it's just like it's not that being God is what grounds the causal powers. It's that like well, so I think there's in the case of God, there's maybe an underlying thing that unifies the causal powers, which is being perfect, where it's like you have this thing that's perfect, and then this explains why both what it is and why it has the properties that it does, where they like weakly emerge from perfection or something.
Yeah, I have questions about this sort of type of explanation. So I'm kind of thinking, well, the perfection wouldn't explain why God has whatever powers he has, because it's the other way around. like he only counts as perfect because he has all of these powers.
Yeah. Well, so I maybe like I think that's sort of plausible, but it's not obviously right. Where like I mean, I have an article on this called "Essence, Energies, and Excellence" if people are interested. But I think you can think that like God's powers. Well, I mean, 2 points. One of them is you can think that God's powers sort of like emerge in some way from they sort of weakly emerge from perfection. So you can think that kind of the explanation goes the other way. So he has this fundamental property of being perfect, and then that explains the other properties. And like when I think about this, like maybe like I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's not obvious that it doesn't. So it's like, this will maybe reduce the prior probability a little bit, but it won't be a knockout blow. And then I mean, and then the other point is that sometimes you can think that like even if a theory posits that something is prior to its parts, like even if the things that make something some way are prior to its parts, then you can still posit that having parts arranged a certain way is like more probable. So for instance, modal realism is more plausible than modal realism minus a random world, where like even though the possible worlds in some sense explain why, like there's sort of a sense in which having modal realism being true depends on all the possible worlds being there. But
yeah. Well, yeah. So, by the way, like I was going to comment on the modal realism example, where like there could be this other philosopher, Louis Starr, who thinks there's all these possible worlds, except and you just describe one specific possibility, and he thinks that one doesn't exist. Right. Well,
that guy would be roughly as sane as David.
Yeah, he'll just be a little bit crazier than David Lewis currently. Yeah, what's wrong with that? Well, okay. The issue about modal realism is sort of a conceptual issue, right? Because philosophers are agreeing that there are these facts about possibility and impossibility and about counterfactuals and whatever. And Lewis is saying, yeah, actually the correct understanding of what we're talking about when we say that something is possible is this stuff about the other universes.
Yeah.
And
so
the thing,
just assume none of those arguments work, but you're a modal realist for other reasons. Like maybe you're a modal realist because you think it's like simple or something, or like you think it lacks arbitrary limits.
Wait.
You're not a modal realist to explain modal facts.
Well, I'm not sure if this counts as modal realism anymore. Is this just like a multiverse theory? Because if it doesn't have anything to do with possibility, and right, we're not trying to explain possibility and contingency.
I mean, I think it is going to be different from a multiverse theory for sort of technical reasons that would require it to explain. But I mean, I guess you can just think of it as a multiverse theory that says that there's a multiverse containing all the possible worlds, but they're like non-spatio-temporally connected.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's better than the theory that there's a multiverse containing all the possible worlds, like except for one random one.
Okay, so yeah, so because what I was going to say was, if you admit that one of the possible worlds doesn't exist, then you basically have to admit that this isn't what we're talking about when we say things are possible, right? But okay, anyway, yeah, somebody has the multiverse theory, so they're not claiming that this explains the notion of possibility. There's just one that doesn't exist. Yeah, that would be weird, I guess.
Yeah, I actually was briefly sympathetic to sort of like modal realism, or like I guess the what we might call a Lewisian multiverse, where it's like you think that all the possible stuff exists, but you don't think that because like I don't know, it seems kind of simple, and then maybe like for anthropic reasons, it's like it explains there being lots of people, so it makes my existence likely. But I don't think that's the way reality is because of undermines induction.
Okay, so there's
that view is better than the view that all the worlds minus one.
Okay, yeah. So we imagine some different multiverse theories. So there's a multiverse theory where like every possible universe, maybe some people think like every everything that's a model of general relativity and quantum mechanics is a world that exists, right? So they wouldn't think literally every logical possibility, but okay. And then there's somebody who thinks, yeah, everyone except, and then they describe some very specific possibility. They think just that one doesn't exist. Okay, all right, but you could imagine another sort of limited version of the multiverse where the person says, I think like there's a large number of universes, but not infinite. Okay, so like, there's a large finite number. And but I'm not going to like try to pick out specifically which ones do and don't exist. I'm just saying, okay, so that third one seems to me like way more reasonable than the second one where they try to specify the one that doesn't exist, right?
But the third one seems way less reasonable than the first one.
I'm not sure that's true. I didn't see that. So there's like every possibility, or there's just like whatever 10% of the possibilities. I don't know, or it's just a finite number. I don't know. And then, because I don't know why the multiverse exists anyway, so I don't know why it couldn't be a finite number.
Yeah, well,
that's implausible.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons you might think is because it's like, you might think that prior probability has something to do with how simple it would be to describe some state of affairs. And it's like pretty simple to describe the state of affairs of the multiverse. It's just like, I can do it in one sentence. All the ways reality can be actually exist.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is what matters, right? So, one thing is like, well, how simple your description can be depends on your language. And
so I think maybe you'll have to have some way of working out what a language is. So it's going to be, something to do with the amount of information expressed, but maybe it'll like be that plus taking into account fundamental properties. I don't have a well worked out theory of exactly how to calculate prior probabilities. I think like my claim is like, I don't know exactly how to do it, but however you do it, you should say modal realism is better than modal realism minus one world, or modal realism multiverse view.
Right. Well, so it's clear to me
share the intuition, but like I don't know.
It's clear to me that the theory where you just subtract one very specifically described world, that's very implausible. But it's not clear to me that it's very implausible if somebody just says, like half of the possibility to realize somewhere.
When I said modal realism minus a world, I didn't mean you had to specify what the world is, just like modal realism minus one particular world, minus some world, but we haven't specified what it is. Okay, I mean, I guess we have different intuitions about that, but that case seems like a slam dunk to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Or what do you make of the like God can do all things except one, or God knows all things minus one?
Yeah.
I guess you were saying like there wouldn't be an explanation for why he doesn't know that fact. But if you think that what matters is like, it's like, God's ultimate properties are, if you think that like God's ultimate God's existence is in some way parasitic on his properties, then, and his properties are parasitic on knowing each particular thing, then
okay, so I want to sort of like change it to his degree of power, because I think like the best response to the problem of evil is something about the limitations of God's power rather than his knowledge. Maybe his knowledge is also limited. Okay, but it's probably not that he doesn't know about the bad things happening. But okay, so it would
that'd be kind of hilarious.
Yeah. He doesn't know that people are mortal.
No, I mean, like he just has like a really implausible philosophical views. Like he just actually he had to rationalize meat eating, so he came up with all these like super implausible philosophical views. So he's like, suffering, human suffering and dying, it's the circle of life, and lions.
It's natural. It's in accordance with my will. I told people whatever. I told people they could kill each other.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. But anyway, so it would be weird if I just picked out some arbitrary class of things and I say God couldn't do them. But I don't think it's weird if it's sort of like he has a limited degree of power. So the things that he can't do are sort of the things that would be harder to do. Right. It'd be weird if like he can pick up anything except he just can't pick up this pencil. Okay, fine. But if like he could pick up, things under a certain weight, that's not weird.
Why would why would it be weird for him to be able to pick up things? Wait, okay, so imagine two hypotheses. One hypothesis is God is fully omnipotent. The other hypothesis, God is omnipotent. He can do everything except he can't lift up things above a certain weight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it
And
would be
we don't
weird.
have to specify exactly what the weight is, but the second
Yeah.
hypothesis is there's some weight where God can't lift up things above that weight.
Yeah, I think that's totally plausible. Okay, but
What?
I think it would be weird. It would be weird if that was his only limitation, of course, right? So
Yeah.
like there would be limitations on his.
Okay, sorry. I was talking about a case where that was his only limitation, and that would
Right.
be crazy.
So like he would be able to create things. There would also be a limit to how big of a thing he could create and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my claim is that like it's sort of analogous to the case where you think that there's some patch of physics where that follows different laws, where it's like positing that just like positing that things are perfectly uniform is like a much better theory than positing that there are specific laws. I don't know. Though I guess we've been sort of on this particular subject for a bit. Yeah, we could talk about let's see. So you made a few points. We should talk about the problem of evil at some point, but first, I mean, I guess I don't have that much useful to say on the contingency argument, but so the issue you're raising is the issue of modal collapse, where you're like, and all I know is there have been like a million philosophy articles written that get into really complex and technical stuff, and I haven't read any of them, but I know like there's a lot of literature on this. And so my claim is just like, this is not so much of a slam dunk that it makes it super obvious that we should reject the PSR. And maybe I would conclude that if I looked into the topic greatly, but I haven't. I think I read Joe Schmid has an article called like The Fruitful Death of Modal Collapse Arguments. I think I read that like a few years ago and thought it sounded plausible, but I don't really remember the details. But I mean, I guess my claim is like, I don't think either stage of the contingency argument is obviously wrong. And so that'll mean that like God has a perfect God has like an okay prior probability of maybe like 1%.
Okay. All right, but
if each stage has a 10% chance of succeeding, then it'll be 1%.
Okay. Yeah. So I haven't looked into that literature either. I just read Peter Van Inwagen's account, and his argument persuaded me when like 30 years ago when I read it.
I read it more recently.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Oh. Yeah. But could there be I don't know what my credence is in there being a perfect being. I don't know how to deal with that at all, because like I have philosophical views where maybe it's metaphysically impossible, but my philosophical views might be wrong. But I also worry about like, you get paradoxes involving infinities. And so I worry about, assigning non-zero priors to hypotheses that involve some kind of infinities. And then you get like infinite expected values for things, right? Like happens in Pascal's wager. And so, and especially like if there's a hypothesis that posits some infinite quantity, and I've got an argument that is metaphysically impossible, but somebody says, yeah, but your argument might be wrong because you're limited. Maybe you're confused about something, whatever. And so you got to assign non-zero prior to this thing. I'm like, okay. So the expected size of the universe is infinity automatically, because I'm not 100% certain that it's finite. All right. And so in the case of Pascal's wager, it just leads to like the infinite expected payoff from becoming a Christian.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, I think that having a creed, so if your prior in theism is 0, then your overall credence in theism should be 0.
Yeah, good point.
But that's crazy. Like your credence and like think about like Scott Alexander has a good article on this where he's like called "Stop Adding Zeros," where like if your credence in theism is 0, then like if you continued muttering statements forever that you were as confident in a view rejected by about 20% of philosophers, and about 80% of philosophers of religion, that like you could utter those statements forever and you would never be wrong. And that doesn't seem right, where it's like, which is more likely, theism or that you'll win the lottery a million times in a row? I think theism's more likely.
I'm not sure if it is. But, well,
really? like
I'm not sure.
you think that the odds that I'm right about that I'm right that theism has that the rational credence around theism is like around half, or that Richard Swinburne's right, or the odds of this like basically zero. It's less likely than that you'll win the lottery a million times.
I'm not sure if it's zero, but I think it might be zero.
But if you think it might be zero, like if you're not sure if it should be zero, then your like overall credence should be like not zero, because like maybe it's zero, maybe it's like 10%, but
yeah, well,
yeah, I think this is true a lot of the time, where like there are going to be theories where like you'll have views about something being metaphysically impossible, like
yeah, but I mean, this is why I was bringing up that there could be paradoxes. Right. So, and I brought up Pascal's wager because there's one case where they say, oh well, there's like a non-zero probability, right, that whatever that the Christian God exists, and so therefore you're just like you're forced to conclude that it's rational to believe, right? But you can do this with lots of different hypotheses, right? So, and then like here's another example for the infinite ethics. Like there are these Kantian deontologists who think that like the moral weight of a promise is basically infinite. Like the obligation to keep a promise outweighs the obligation to produce any amount of utility. And so now, because there are some Kantians, and they're smart people and they're not retarded, like you have to assign a non-zero credence.
Well, that's contentious. I don't know if I grant that there are any Kantians who have that view who are,
How about Kant?
Yeah, well, that guy got a lot. Like that guy got a lot wrong. I think that Kant thinks something makes it less likely.
Well, okay. My point was sort of like there's this argument that says, you assign a non-zero credence to Kant being right, and he says that this obligation outweighs everything else. And so now, even if after you discount it by the small chance that he's right, it's still an infinitely weighty obligation. So there's just weird stuff that happens when you have a theory that involves some kind of infinity, right?
Yeah, I agree. You get some weird stuff, but like, I don't know. I think the way to answer that is not to actually have a credence of zero in views held by lots of smart people, where the way to answer it is like in the Kantian case, you say, well, maybe actually in utility, like there are lots of ways where we could be wrong in the Kantian direction, but like there are lots of ways we could be wrong in the opposite direction. So like maybe utility is actually infinitely more important than we thought before. Maybe like time loops or something infinitely. So like utility is like really good or something, or maybe they're like little gremlins that experience infinite times the utility that we do or something. Like just like there are lots of absurd ways you can get infinite value. And I basically think that the Kantian story is like so implausible to be like, if it's less than 1 in like a trillion or something, then it's like, okay, then you kind of mostly ignore it because it's just swamped by the other, random ways that things can be infinite in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, so like, the person giving this argument would be saying, oh yeah, okay, so there's a whole bunch of possibilities where you get like infinite moral weight to infinitely strong moral reasons for acting, right? But most of them cancel out. Okay, but the argument that Immanuel Kant was a really smart person and he believed this isn't canceled out because there's like no other smart person who believed that there was like an infinitely strong obligation to break promises, right? And so, you just need a little bit more. Okay. And so I don't know, like, I don't know what is the right way of thinking about this, right? But
yeah, you could also, you could also do what's called tail discounting, where you just think that like you discount very low probability events. And you can show that, like, you can show basically that Nick Beckstead and Taruji Thomas, I think his name, have a paper on this where they show basically that anyone will have to either deny transitivity or basically like bite the bullet in the like St. Petersburg game where you trade infinite money or infinite utility or any finite amount of utility for like a guaranteed loss of utility, and like you can get money pumped and stuff, like all sorts of gnarly stuff, or you have to accept tail discounting. Like I'm sort of inclined to be just a fanatic maybe, and like to just think, you should throw away your life savings for this to play the St. Petersburg game.
I had a discussion of this. I think this is in Approaching Infinity, where I sort of claim that it's an impossible scenario, right?
Well,
But
how confident are you in that?
I'm not sure, right? But
Yeah, I think, but I sort of accept the practical advice given by the tail discounters, where it's like there's so many like ways that things could be absurdly, like just really obscure ways that things could be of infinite value. So I think basically most of those will just sort of like be sufficiently negligible to kind of roughly cancel out. And
roughly cancel out. That's not good enough.
Yeah.
They
Well,
have
like
to
I don't know. I
exactly
think
cancel.
like suppose I didn't like so suppose I was considering lying to save the world. And Kant and the Kantians say you shouldn't lie in any circumstance. I'm like, no, I think the odds that if we save the world, that it would like bring about infinite utility, or maybe like God would look favorably upon it and give me infinite utility or something. I think the odds of that are way better than the odds that the Kantians are right.
Well, okay. I mean that requires assigning not zero, but an extremely low credence to Kant being right, right?
That is the credence you should
Because
assign Kant being right.
Because just like from the laws of physics, you can't get infinite utility, because we're going to reach the heat death of the universe at some point. So no matter what you do now, you can't stop that from happening. There's also a possibility that if you save the world, that will cause infinite disutility, right? You got to make sure that that's not canceled by the possibility of causing infinite utility, right? Because a lot of life is suffering.
Yeah, like I think you're gonna have like lots of complicated stuff of exactly what to do with infinite utility, where like infinite makes the infinite makes lots of stuff get really weird. But I think definitely the wrong way to think about it is to be 100% sure that 80% of philosophers of religion are wrong.
Yeah, well, so yeah, like what are the alternative way to think about it? You could say, okay, well, just for decision theory purposes, you get to ignore some really low probabilities. Okay, good. So maybe the probability of, traditional theism is just really low. It's not zero. Okay. But it's low enough that we get to ignore it, like in making practical decisions. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so here I'm not arguing that you should like start going to church for Pascal's wager grounds.
Yeah.
Here I'm just arguing, and maybe you should. I'm sort of sympathetic to that, though I don't go to church even. Maybe because I'm irrational, and when I'm burning in hell, I'll really regret it. When I get called before the perfect God, and he's like, "You had the wrong beliefs," and then he sends me off to the dungeon.
And then he tortures you forever. You're gonna be like, God damn it! I should have listened to Pascal.
Okay. But like I'm just saying like I think your prior in theism shouldn't be zero, especially because there are lots of arguments, like a priori arguments that aim to establish theism, like the contingency argument, where like I'm not sold on either premise, but it's not the case that both of the premises are like super obviously false. Like okay, maybe you're like pretty sure that the premises are false. But like, are you 1,000,000 to 1? Is that the odds you give to each to the premises being true, like, or being false?
But I don't know. Okay, well let me say another thing about the low epistemic probability, right? Because like I think we might be talking about hypotheses whose logical probability is 0, but you're saying they have a non-trivial epistemic probability or something.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that like if you use this kind of reasoning, you can get some contradictions, right? So like, you heard about the 4-color theorem, right? In mathematics and whatever, it has like a really long, complicated proof. Okay. But it has a logical probability of 1 because it's a theorem. But are you 100% certain that that theorem is true? Like, maybe they made a mistake in the proof. Okay, so not 100% certain. So I have to assign a non-zero credence to the 4-color theorem being false. Okay, but that's going to entail like just like I could logically infer from that a non-zero probability of contradictions being true, right? Or of the negation of some of the axioms of arithmetic or something like that, right? And so
I think you would say, I mean, yeah, you could say that there's I think the odds that contradictions are true is non-zero, but like very low.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, what you would want to say is that if the 4-color theorem is true, or is false, then it wouldn't entail a contradiction. It would just be like the ways that you think it entails a contradiction are themselves mistaken.
Well, yes, but like, what I'm saying is like that. So because it is in fact true, assigning a non-zero credence to it being false entails a non-zero credence for some contradiction, right? And so like you could validly infer from that credence to some paradoxical results, I think, right? And so I'm a little bit uncomfortable when like, there's a thing that might have a logical probability of 0, but you say, but we have to assign a non-zero credence because we might be wrong about the logical probabilities. And then just like reasoning from there, I feel a little bit worried about that.
Yeah, I don't think you could get a contradiction from that, where as long as you keep everything in the realm, as long as you like don't equivocate between logical and epistemic probability, then I don't think you could get a contradiction from that.
Well, I mean, if you're probabilistically coherent, then you're going to have to assign a non-zero credence to, the negation of some axioms of arithmetic, right?
Yeah.
And then, okay. And then, like you might wind up assigning non-zero credence to contradictions or things like that.
Yeah, you would assign a non-zero credence to them. Yeah.
And then, okay. Well, I
mean, that's what I do. Like, I think you're probably right about the liar sentence, but like, I don't know. J.C. Beale might be right. I'm not 100% sure he's wrong. I mean,
okay, but I mean, you might wind up assigning a non-zero credence to contradictions in in classical logic, right? So not an alternative logic that saves you from the consequences, right? So then, a contradiction entails anything. So then you have to assign a non-zero credence to everything, every proposition and its negation. And then, like, I'm not sure how reasoning goes from there, right? Like,
wait, I mean, like, there are lots of things that are like ridiculously unlikely, but you assign a very low probability to them. Where like I don't know how you get ridiculous reasoning there. You get the odds. You get like maybe there's a 1 in 100 quadrillion chance that reasoning might be ridiculous in various ways. But I don't know how you get reasoning is like actually ridiculous.
But I mean, like, keep in mind that like so everything follows from a proposition. Keep in mind that that includes propositions about probabilities and about logic and stuff like that. And so like there's a non-zero credence to the claim that since I'm assigning non-zero credence to P, I have to jump out the window or whatever.
Yeah, well, right. So you think it might be the case that if you assign a non-zero credence to P, where P is that proposition, then you have to jump out the window. But you think that's probably false, so you don't have to jump out the window.
Well, but the claim that it's probably false, like, you don't even know that that's true, right?
I'm very confident that it's probably false. I could be wrong.
But you don't even know that you're confident that it's probably false, right?
No, I do. Why don't
you have to assign a non-zero credence to your not being confident.
Why can't I think that the odds that I have a non-zero credence in that are like 0.00001?
Okay, but you also have to assign a credence to it not being 0.00001 or whatever, and maybe it's 0.99999.
For each of these things, there will be some odds that like the opposite's true, but like those odds will be really low.
Well, I mean, I think that you keep assuming that there's some stopping point where, there's some proposition that you can reason from, but, if like you're assigning non-zero credence to contradictions, then there's like, you can't rely on anything.
You can rely on contradictions, even if you think on there being no contradictions, even if you think maybe there are contradictions.
Well, no, but like you don't know what the consequences of you don't know what the consequences of anything are, right? The consequences of anything could be anything. And
I think I don't understand the point you're making. I don't understand.
You can't do any reasoning unless you have some proposition that you get to just start with without further qualifications.
Yeah, so you'll have certain things that you start with, and from that you get other propositions, including that you're not certain in your starting points, but you're like pretty sure. So you're I think I'm not certain in the laws of logic, but I'm like pretty sure that they're right.
Well, but when you do your reasoning, do you reason using the laws of logic?
Yeah.
Or do you?
But why think you can't use a method even if you're not certain that it's right? If you're just like very confident that it's right.
you have to know how you're supposed to treat the uncertainty.
Yeah, well,
Right. So like that, right. So like the way that you deal with being uncertain about laws of logic depends upon treating something else as being settled. And
but it doesn't require treating it as being certain. It just requires like assuming that something else is the case. I think you get to assume that things are the case if they're very, very likely, and you can use them in their reasoning if in your reasoning if they're very, very likely.
Well, but I mean, I think we're just going to go around in circles. Like,
Yeah.
well, you don't
Maybe I'm
know
not
how
getting
you're
this.
supposed. Well, you're assuming that something like maximize expected utility, some principle like that. But maybe what you should actually do is minimize expected utility, or like.
Yeah, but probably not. So, like in expectation, my all things considered judgment.
But in saying that, you're assuming the maximize expected utility view, and on the minimize expected utility
No.
view, the fact that
just
that
assuming
view
it's
is
more likely.
improbable doesn't stop you from using it. But
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, you're probably
Okay.
just going around too much about that.
Yeah. So I guess okay. Okay. We could talk about the anthropic argument. That would be fun. I like that. I think that's a fun argument. So I mean, I guess okay. I think there are like. So I think it's easy to show that there are at least Beth1 people. So Beth1 is it's like the number of real numbers, which are like include infinite non-repeating decimals. I always get mixed up real and natural numbers, but yeah, okay, I got it right.
They're real. It's the continuum, the number of points in space.
Yeah. So okay, here seems like a possible world. You just have an infinite number of planks of wood. What for each of them is the length of the one of the natural numbers, or one of the real numbers. The real numbers, I think. And then just on it, there's a different person on each of them. There's a different person standing who has the same mental states, who's like psychologically identical to me, but is like they're not all the same person. They all have their own distinct fields of experience.
Yeah,
that seems possible.
So if each of the people has a finite size, then you can only fit finitely many of them in space. Or sorry, you can only fit Aleph and all of them in space. Right. So like if the people are point sized, then you can fit continuum many of them. Right. Or if they have like zero volume, then you can fit continuum many. But like if they,
could you do it where it's like one could you have well, I guess so. I think okay, yeah, so maybe I mean I'm inclined to think you could have like different real spaces where like they're both real but they're not interacting.
So like here's a thought, like maybe there could be people who are like us, but actually there's another spatial dimension. Right. And there's like continuum many of these people, which are three-dimensional people, but they're like stacked on top of each other in the fourth dimension, right? So in the four, you see what I'm saying? Like there's continuum many three-dimensional objects in the four-dimensional space. Right. Or to make it more imaginable, there could be continuum many two-dimensional objects in the three space.
Though I guess you think that
we're just like flat plane people.
But I guess you think that the two-dimensional stuff is impossible.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, I think measure zero objects can't exist.
Yeah. Well, okay.
But that is an idiosyncratic view. So
yeah. So I mean, what do you think of just like so? Imagine they're not embodied; they're just disembodied minds, and you just have one of them thinking about the number one of them thinking about the number two, one of them for all the natural numbers.
Yeah. So that gets you
real numbers. Jesus, I can never. Why? It's very annoying. This is like the one. Yeah.
So you might think, oh, well, maybe there's like people thinking about every real number. And my claim is no, actually, you can't think about an irrational number, or you can only think about a few of them. Like you can think about pi or the square root of 2, right? But there's infinitely many irrational numbers that you can't name, and you also can't have a concept of, right? So because it's got an infinite decimal expansion, and you can't grasp the entire infinite decimal expansion, so you actually can't think of all those numbers. Right. Yeah, so that's surprising, but anyway, you might just think, oh well, okay, there could just be continuum many disembodied souls. Why not that? Well, I don't know if there could be.
I mean, well, so I think there can be at least continuum many. You can just keep adding one. Or wait, is continuum? My like mathematical ineptitude is being revealed here. But is continuum, is that the cardinality greater than Aleph null?
Right. Yeah. So it's called that because like you take a line, the line is continuous, right? Like it's got all all the points are filled in. Okay. So the continuum is the cardinality of the points on the line, which is also the cardinality of the real numbers. Yeah, so the countable infinity is the infinity of the counting numbers, the natural numbers. So, but I'm not even sure that there are Aleph null possible people, because I don't know.
Yeah, it might only be like 6 or 7.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure there's more than that, because if there yeah, because there's 8 billion people on the earth, so there's got to be at least that many, but it's probably a lot more than that. If it's finite, it's a large finite number, because no person has ever found himself with 2 bodies, as far as I know. So
yeah, I actually did one like a few days, but like it was sort of crazy.
What? Yeah, 2 bodies for a few days.
Yeah, I was kidding.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess. Well, so what? Okay. What about the case where? So the case you described, where like you have a world Aleph null in size, where you have all the So if it's Aleph null, then it's countable. You can give a coherent list of it, and then you have you make all the people, and then someone has a baby. What happens? You're like, well, what happens is that there's one mind that has 2 bodies.
Yeah. That would have to happen, right? Or the baby would be a zombie, right?
Okay, to me it seems conceivable that after there's a world with Aleph null people, someone would have a baby and they wouldn't have 2 minds or a.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you can imagine a world in which there's infinitely many people, but the thing is, like, each of those people has to have a specific identity. So can you imagine all of these identities, right? And well, in a sense, you can't really imagine any identities other than your own. You're only aware of your own specific self, and that there are some other selves, but you can't exactly specifically identify them. Like you only see the bodies that these other selves are animating, so you can't actually even imagine the other selves in a sense. Right? You can't imagine them specifically like they're hexaity. You can just sort of like imagine the qualitative fact that there is another self. So anyway, like I think, well, it might be that there's just like a limited number of possible selves. So when we run out, we just have to like reuse them.
Yeah, that seems false.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the case, but
yeah.
But anyway, I don't think it's Beth too.
Yeah, I mean, I have I think, sort of like the Lewisian multiverse seems possible.
Yeah.
Like it seems like it could exist, and that would have Beth 2 people. And it seems like they wouldn't have to have overlapping minds.
Yeah, I mean, if you say that, you might as well say like, well, it could be Beth 3, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not super committed to Beth 2. Like, so there is an article that was about this, where that talked about the implications of Lewis's modal realism for the number of possible people. It didn't go into that much detail, but it talked about this a little bit in some Phil paper. And it suggested that it's at least Beth 2, but maybe more. And so
Yeah.
so it's just like however many got us to make all of them.
I see. Yeah, so when I was in graduate school, one of my professors was Tim Maudlin. So he had an argument where he was saying, well, first he was wondering if there are duplicate possible worlds. And he was saying, like, Lewis should say that there are, because it's not impossible for there to be duplicate worlds. And then he was like, okay, so what's the cardinality of the set of all possible worlds? Well, so like, there could be another possible world that's qualitatively just like this one, but it's just another copy of this one. And there's no logical reason why you couldn't have that. Okay. And so how many of those duplicates are there? And then he's like, well, it could be any cardinality. Right. So like, right. But then there's sort of like an argument that, well, it had to be as many as possible. Like you have to have the maximum possible cardinality because because everything that's logically possible is real. Right. Okay. But then there's no limit to how many things are logically possible. So it has to be the maximum cardinality, whatever that is. But there is no maximum cardinality, right? Because that just entails a contradiction in set theory. If you have a maximum cardinality. So anyway, so there's an argument that the whole theory was incoherent.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I read I think Lewis had a response to some similar arguments, and I think it seemed sort of plausible, but this is all way above my pay grade.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. So like, okay, I guess I sort of treat it as maybe a brute fact how many possible people there are. Right? These are possible souls. Right? It might just be how many souls there are, right? And then they just get embodied or not embodied. Maybe it's a brute fact, or maybe there's an underlying explanation, but we humans just don't grasp what it is. So anyway, maybe someday somebody will figure out how many souls there are. But as of now, I don't know what it is, and I don't even know how to assign probabilities to the different possibilities.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, but it might.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah. So I think, like, I don't know. It seems like for each of the possible worlds, like if there are best 2 possible worlds, I don't know. To me, it seems like just like the number of different like tables or something will be that there other like arrangements of tables would be Beth 2. I think the number of like possible people would be Beth 2 for kind of similar reasons.
Wait, why would the number of table arrangements be Beth 2?
Well, because I can conceive of in the Beth 2, or wait, why would the number of possible tables be Beth 2? Well, I guess
or whatever it was that you were saying about the tables. So
yeah, well, I mean, it seems like there could be a table. Well, so I don't really understand the proof of why there have to be Beth 2 people, or of why there have to be Beth 2 worlds, but I understand the proof of why there have to be Beth 1, where it seems like, a world with just like a table in size of each of the
so
real numbers.
Yeah, so there's
as possible.
They have to be at least continuum many possible worlds. So I think I think the argument was, well, so there's continuum many space-time points. And then for each space-time point, it can be either occupied or unoccupied. And that gives you, the number of possibilities is then 2 to the power of the number of space-time points.
I see. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, okay. Yeah. And that's the next cardinality up.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, so like, it seems like the possible worlds have, it seems like there will be like Beth 2, like there are Beth 2 possible worlds containing agents, but it seems like there are like, I don't know. I have the intuition that if that's true, then like, for each of the worlds that contains an agent, there's like a different version that at least could exist, where like just like in the table case where like, or in the case that I was trying to describe, where like that turned out to be impossible. Where like, you know, there's one person standing on each of the well, I don't think it's possible, but that turned out to be standing on each of the planks of wood for each of the real numbers in size. Like just like I it sort of seems conceivable that they could have a different mind. And so if there were best two different ways things could be arranged, it seems like you could have like for those you could have a different arrangement. But I guess that would just
well, yeah. So I mean, like you have to sort of imagine that there's these best two possible worlds, and each of them contains a different possible individual. But then, you know, I would just say, no, well, it's not obvious to me that there's that many worlds with a different possible individual, right? Like, so there could be all those possible worlds, and you know, they could each contain an individual, like a conscious being. But it could be that, you know, the same conscious beings get reused in these different worlds.
Yeah, but to me, it seems like you could have different ones for each of the worlds.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we could talk about let's see, we could talk about the problem of evil.
Yeah.
So to be clear, I agree the problem of evil is a really good argument. And like, I don't know, that's the main reason why I'm not a theist, because it's hard to see why so many, but I don't know. I think there are a few things to be said about the problem of evil. I mean, one of them is, so I have this theodicy called the hypothesis of indifference theodicy. And the basic idea is that so God would put us in a world where with broadly indifferent natural laws, where like the universe seems broadly indifferent to our existence. Why would he do this? Well, I mean, there are like a few reasons, but if you're a theist, you should think there's an infinite afterlife, where you'll get tortured forever if you have the wrong belief. No, you shouldn't.
If you don't worship Allah.
Yeah. But so if you're a theist, you should think that there's an infinite afterlife. And so then the question is just, would there be a reason to place us in this world, in a world like this, that's broadly indifferent, for 0% of our total existence? Or maybe it has to be more than 0% or something for anthropic reasons, but for a very small percent. And it doesn't seem super obvious that it wouldn't if there are lasting benefits. And then the question is, okay, so would there be lasting benefits? Because if there are lasting benefits, they last forever. You know, it seems like there might be reasons for doing it that we don't know about. It might be that it like strengthens our character in some way, where like, or forges relationships that are valuable and that last a really long time. It might be that like just seeing what a universe where God didn't exist, what it would be like, would like make us appreciate God more, where it's like, oh, you know, we see how bad things would be in his absence. And if you think experiencing God is of infinite value, then increasing our like appreciation of God is like of more than infinite, or would be itself of infinite value.
Yeah. Well, so just a couple of things. Like I think about, you know, if there's an infinite afterlife, then I think we should be in it now. Like I think the probability of our being in the afterlife, you know, as opposed to the finite part of our existence would be 1, because it's, you know, the ordinary life is 0%. Okay. But anyway, the other thing is,
well, maybe you would think that like every few million years or something we get placed in like, you know, we need like 100-year break from the beatific vision to renew our appreciation or something. Or maybe you would think that you're, I don't know, like whether the argument you're making is the one you lay out in your paper, existence as evidence of immortality. And maybe that's right, where like, but I don't know.
That's why you should go for reincarnation, right?
Yeah. But it gets very tricky if you think like I do. You know, if you think there are best two people, then the total number of moments of people having your life and not having your life will be the same, whether or not you have it. So it's like you get into very tricky issues. And so yeah, I think like what you're saying is sort of plausible, but it's not super obviously right. But I mean, and so maybe it's weird on theism that you're alive right now, but it's also really weird on atheism, where like suppose all you knew is that there was no God, what would you expect? Well, here's one thing you wouldn't expect: you being immortal. You would think that was unlikely. And so, like, if your experiences infinitely recur, where the current experiences you're having now, them infinite times, or at least similar experiences infinite times, then like that's unexpected both on theism and on atheism. So it's not clear which way the evidence points.
Wait, what? Really? What? So anyway, so my view is reincarnation, right? So like, yeah, you'll have infinitely many lifetimes, and infinitely many of them will be similar to this one. And so like the percentage of the time that you're in a life that's like this one is non-zero. And you just want it not to be zero, right? Because okay, but anyway, okay. The other thing I wanted to say though about the problem of evil is like a lot of the responses to the problem of evil, as explanations for why God doesn't stop evil, are also explanations for why you shouldn't stop evil. And when you realize that, then you feel a lot less good about them, right? So somebody says, well, I don't know, like it helps people develop virtue in their response to evil, right? Okay. So I'm like, yeah, like I saw this serial killer, and like I knew that he was kidnapping people and murdering them, but then I realized that was helping them to develop virtue. So like helping his victims to develop moral virtue or something, like, and then the cops were experiencing moral virtue in going to whatever, catch the criminal. So I didn't want to interfere with that, so I shouldn't do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
And like it's really hard to get an explanation for why God shouldn't stop the evil that doesn't also make it so that we shouldn't stop it, which presumably the theists don't want.
Yeah, well, so that's what's good about my theodicy, where I think what you want to do is you want to posit there are certain core fundamental features of reality that are very valuable, that make it good for God not to intervene. So like it's good to just be in an indifferent universe that actually looks like what a universe, like of the very small percentage of universes that don't have God that have us, could put us in a universe that looks roughly like that, so we can sort of see what things are like in the absence of God. And so that explains, if you think God might do that, that explains why God wouldn't intervene. But this is positing what's really valuable about God's non-intervention. The reason God doesn't intervene is because he wants to put us in basically broadly in an indifferent universe for a very small percentage of our existence. And so, but that doesn't affect the goodness of our interventions. So for any particular intervention, it'll be like, that won't affect your reasons not to stop the serial killer. It'll just affect your reasons to maybe not like redesign. Well, I don't know. It wouldn't affect your reasons to do anything, I guess.
Yeah. So like there's a class of theodicies that survive the challenge from us not stopping the serial killers, which involves something like, so it might be that if God intervenes, that would cause us to think that God is going to intervene. Like maybe that's bad, right? So like maybe God wanted to create a universe in which we wouldn't realize that there was a God or something, or it wouldn't look like he was constantly intervening. Kind of like maybe there are bad effects when we see God intervening, but that wouldn't happen if one of us intervenes in something bad. So we don't have reason to not intervene when we see bad things.
Yeah. To be clear, that's not quite the theodicy I was giving. Yeah. Where like the claim isn't that just that God doesn't want us to like to look like he had intervened, because I agree that's not a very good view, where it's like, couldn't he have secretly couldn't he have just dropped a boulder on Hitler when he was very young? Like if that had happened, no one would like be like, well, I guess God definitely exists, because no one would know about Hitler. So I guess, in a case like that, the idea of the theodicy is like, it's actually valuable for God to basically be apart from the world, for him actually not to intervene, not just to look like he's not intervening. It's like, here's an analogy. Suppose, you and your spouse, and your spouse is considering like going out of town for a bit, and your spouse is omniscient, and so your spouse thinks that like if they go out of town for a bit, then they know it'll happen. It's not inconceivable that there would be something valuable. If your spouse was omniscient, they could know in advance that them actually going out of town would you'd sort of like see, all the things you like about them that you appreciate in their absence. And so then it would sort of strengthen your relationship. And if you think that a relationship with God is net value, then it'd be kind of like that. And it wouldn't be good if you did that for you to like intervene a little bit, if you think the person in the future will have full knowledge of that. where it's like, no, you actually want to just have a full policy of non-intervention to show what it's like to have none.
Oh, wait. So was this the suggestion that, like, later after we get into the afterlife, we'll know everything that happened, so we'll know that God didn't intervene, and if so, like, he's going to grant us something like omniscience, and then we'll.
Yeah.
Okay, so at that time it will be good that we know that he didn't intervene. So
Yeah.
okay, so like, I mean, it sounds like the disadvantage of killing Hitler when he's a baby is that then people in heaven will know that God killed Hitler when he was a baby. But then it's like, yeah, but why is that bad?
Well, the idea is that it's bad. So there's something valuable about God actually being apart from the world and putting us in a broadly indifferent universe. Maybe it's good for like unknown reasons. Maybe it's good for the reason I described of how it strengthens our relationship with God, where it's not just like it produces in us the doxastic states. Well, or it's not just that we have the knowledge that they killed Hitler, but it's that what you know that the world that you were in is one in which God was providential and intervening. And now it sounds silly to say, oh, well, isn't getting rid of that worth killing Hitler? But remember, there are infinite people for whom this is the case, for who would be in a situation like that, where it affects their knowledge in the afterlife. Number one. And number two, the goods in the afterlife are maybe of like infinite value. And so even if this somehow like only strengthens our relationship with God or unlocks some other unknown afterlife good by a little bit, then it would be like infinitely worth the evils of the world a million times over.
Okay, but maybe this weakens our relationship with God. When we realize that we die and then we go up to heaven, and then we see that God didn't do shit for us when we were down suffering in this.
Yeah, maybe. My claim is it's just like it's not so implausible that it would strengthen it in the long run, or that there would be some unknown reason for doing it. That like I think the problem of evil is still like a very good argument, but it's not just like it doesn't totally settle the issue.
Oh yeah, well, like part of what you said was, oh well, maybe there's just some other reason that we don't know about.
Well, to be clear, I was suggesting that there was a unknown reason for having a broadly indifferent universe.
Yeah.
But
yeah, but it's like, okay, but there could be some unknown reason for anything. So then this is like a way that you could defend any view.
Yeah, so then the question is what the probability is of there being an unknown reason that we don't know about. So, and like there are lots of cases where we think it's pretty likely that a person who's infinitely wise would have lots of unknown reasons, lots of reasons we don't know about. So Magnus Carlsen often makes moves in chess that I have no idea what he's doing. Even more so, like very good chess playing AIs like AlphaZero.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not Alpha. Yeah, mixing up my Greek Greek with Hebrew.
Yeah. So you would just say, well, when you watch the move, you don't think that it's a bad move, and the reason is like, well, you just got tons of evidence that it's a really strong program. So then you conclude that there are reasons that you don't know.
Yeah.
And then I just feel like, yeah, but we're not in that situation with God. It's like, for us, like a more plausible hypothesis is the reason why stuff is happening that we don't understand is, well, there's no reason for it because there's nobody in charge, right? Or maybe there is a creator, but he's not around and whatever, doesn't have a power.
Yeah. Well, so imagine. So I think the chess case, is more reasonable, where it's like in chess, it's not totally implausible that there would be reasons that you don't know about, because you're like there's a limit to how good you and I are at chess. So it's like but we're like, okay, we can generally recognize some guy starts blundering their queen, then we can know that they're losing. But I think reality is not like chess, where like optimizing the rules of reality is of really extreme value, it's like the things that bring about the optimal goods are things that we don't know about. Why I think this? Well, number one, we're only exposed to 0% of our total existence. And so it would be like trying to make, like, imagine if there was a move that took an infinitely long time, a game that took an infinitely long time, and you only saw the first 20 moves, and you didn't know all the rules. Then could you be confident like, oh, that was a bad move? No, I don't think so. There might be lots of goods that we don't know about. It's just like things are very unpredictable. And so the question is, and so I think it's not terribly unlikely that there would be unknown reasons. The probability of that is not too low.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if it's terribly unlikely, I guess. I feel like a better, more natural explanation is, well, there isn't any being that could have. There's no being with the power to make everything rational. Like, that's more plausible.
I agree that that's a better explanation of evil in a vacuum, but I think there are like 12 or so pieces of data that are explained pretty well by theism. So,
Oh,
like,
okay. All right. Wait. Well, I don't know if we did all 12 of them. But,
well, I don't think they're all arguments against a perfect God, but I think if you have lots of other reason to think theism is right, then even though evil is a lot of evidence, it's like sort of like it's maybe enough to make it sort of even. I guess we can talk about psychophysical harmony. I guess that was the main topic we haven't covered yet.
Okay, but we should do it quickly because we're coming up on 2 hours.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think. What do you think of the psychophysical harmony argument?
Oh yeah, like I keep hearing people say this in the last few months or something, and I don't feel like I get what it sounds like there's supposed to be some amazing coincidence about how my mental states are related to my physical states, but I don't see this amazing coincidence. And then it usually sounds to me like the person who's giving the argument is kind of assuming that mental states are epiphenomenal, in which case, yeah, then it'd just be luck that my mental states are corresponding in sort of rational ways. But I don't think they're epiphenomenal. And if you thought they were epiphenomenal, then I think you have no reason to believe that other people have mental states at all. So
yeah, well, so I don't think the argument assumes epiphenomenalism. The idea is there's going to be certain causal connections where there's going to be some physical state, let's call it physical state A, which is some brain state, which gives rise to some mental state B, which gives rise to some physical state C. So, some mental state, so some state of consciousness. So, for instance, C fibers fire, then consciously you feel pain, and then something physical happens. But the point is, we could switch out mental state B with any of an infinite number of other mental states, while keeping the A and C the same, and you'd get just radical disharmony. And so then it's really weird that they line up in a harmonious way.
Okay, yeah. So I think like a key part of the puzzle is I think that mental states have necessary connections to each other, right, or something like that. And so there's a pattern of ways that mental states would relate to each other, and so you can't just like switch around the mental states and right. So without messing up the rest of your system. An experience of pain would naturally lead to a desire to avoid pain, which would naturally lead to an attempt to avoid pain or something like that. And so if you swap out the experience of pain, then you don't get the things downstream from that.
Okay, but like here's a pot. I mean, so I don't think I agree with that, but we can grant it. I mean, here's like what seems like a possible scenario: world physically identical to ours, but all the mental states are just of like eating fish. It's like if you think a zombie world's possible, there are like lots of worlds that are not quite zombie worlds, but they have consciousness, but they have an unimaginably simple and basic form of consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So. So there could be a world in which people only experience eating fish,
and that's way more simple.
Yes. So what? So the claim is like it's weird that we're not in that world or something.
It's weird that we're not in any of those worlds where eating fish, just having white static noise, just having there are like an infinite number of ways that you could have very simple consciousness.
Okay. I mean, so the reason why we're not in those worlds is so evolution designed us to have certain kinds of complex psychology because it was useful for our survival. And if you only had the eating fish experience, then it wouldn't be useful for survival and reproduction. Whatever the psychophysical laws were, like evolution would try to design your brain to have whatever physical states it had to have to give rise to the right mental state.
Well, what evolution cares about is not so. So it's physical state causes mental state, which causes physical state. But evolution doesn't care at all about the mental state. It only cares about the first and third physical states. And so the point is, the mental state in the middle, there are like lots of things it could be, and there are lots of ways. So imagine a world. So the world I described is like, it's basically a zombie world, but rather than there being no conscious experience, there's just the conscious experience of eating fish. It's physically identical to ours, and that seems conceivable, and it would have simpler psychophysical laws.
Well, but why? Like, why would the people in the eating fish world try to avoid predators, or like why would they? What would be their motives for doing anything? So,
No.
like, are you suggesting? Oh, well,
why do zombies try to avoid predators?
Well, so they don't try to do anything, but
neither do the people in the fish world. They're just like a mechanistic system that.
Well,
I mean, so there's a consciousness, and then maybe what you're asking about them. So I guess they're a soul. So they are not like thinking anything, other than.
Well, but so yeah, this is where it sounds like you're assuming epiphenomenalism or something, right? Or like there could be a world in which epiphenomenalism was true, but then okay, well, so then there just wouldn't be any survival value to having mental states at all. So there's no reason why evolution would have selected for having any mental states.
If there were a world that were exactly physically like ours, but that had very different mental states, my claim is that there are lots of worlds like that are simpler than our world, and that in those worlds, evolution would select in exactly the same way because they would be physically identical to ours.
So I think that I'm not sure if my view is that that's metaphysically impossible, but so I think that our mental states are actually making a difference to what happens physically. And so if you kept like the brain physically the same, but you took away the psychophysical laws, then I think, it would just go haywire. Right. So then our behavior just wouldn't work.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't take away the psychophysical laws. You would just you would have different psychophysical laws where they generate the same physical stuff, but are different mentally.
But I don't think that you could easily generate the same physical consequences, right? Because the mental states are actually doing stuff, right? There's the mental states intervening between the input and the output are making a difference. I mean, it would be highly improbable to get physical behavior that looks like it's intelligent if you didn't actually have mental states, right? I don't want to say that it's metaphysically impossible because you could do this with AI or something, right? But it's just super unlikely.
Yeah, well, so the claim, so maybe it would be unlikely to get a world that's physically exactly like ours. But my claim is there are lots of worlds where you just there are lots of possible psychophysical laws where you get very simple forms of consciousness. And then, so it's weird that our consciousness is complex. So integrated information theory, it's a very simple physical theory where it just says, there's just a consciousness occurs when you get integrated information, and it varies proportional in strength to the amount of integrated information. But then it would be it's very unlikely that that your consciousness would be in some rich, varied, ordered consciousness rather than just something simpler.
Yeah, and by the way, I think they have a theory about what the different qualia are, but that I don't understand it, so I can't go into that. But okay, so I don't know if this helps, but my picture is okay. I don't know. There's some psychophysical laws that relate, particular states of the brain to particular kinds of mental states, and then evolution sort of can adjust the way your brain is, so that it gives rise to certain mental states, and then the mental states are inherently connected to other mental states. And then the evolution can also design your brain so that when you have certain mental states, then the brain gets affected by them in the right way. Okay, and so it's not so evolution is making use of the way beliefs and desires work, right? And the way emotions are related to desires and things like that. So it's making use of the fact that when you have a belief and when you have certain desires, and then you have some beliefs about the world, that tends to cause you to figure out what sequence of actions is necessary to satisfy the desire. out of a wide range of possibilities. And it's like, it's really hard to get a system that picks the right one out of a series of possible actions to get to a certain goal, because nothing in nature is teleological other than consciousness. But anyway, okay, so I don't know if that helped at all, or because I find this whole psychophysical harmony argument very confusing. I feel like I don't understand what people are saying. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it is around the 2-hour mark, so we could wrap up. But I mean, just to address that briefly, like, so maybe that's true, but it's still weird that like it's weird that, so you're like, that consciousness, there are certain, what you're describing requires there being these very complicated psychophysical laws that pair, that make it so that the output of your brain roughly gets like a rich integrated world where you have this complex inner mental life. And my claim is that by far the vast majority of possible psychophysical laws, by far the simplest ones, would just not get anything like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how complicated the laws are, because like often it looks like something is complicated until somebody figures out a way of simplifying it. So when we looked at the physical world, you just look at the physical world without learning any science, it looks like it's super complicated. And then it turns out that maybe there's a simple set of laws. So maybe there's a relatively simple set of psychophysical laws. I don't know.
I mean, there's more to say, but yeah, we are getting around 2 hours. Any last words?
Everybody should read my blog, fakenews.substack.com. Is it com? And on fake news, FAKENOUS. And everybody should buy my books.
Yeah, and if you're doing that, well, you should do that. But more importantly, you should at least go to his blog and then see the one of the recommended blogs is by this guy named Bentham's Bulldog, and he's really, he's a really good guy. He's very smart, very handsome. He sort of possesses all the positive traits in great quantities.
Yeah, really almost perfect, I would say.
It's true, yeah. He possesses at least half of the great making features, but not all of them. But
yeah, which is really weird and improbable. But
yeah. Well, at least it's not fundamental. I emerge from the mind of the creator. But okay. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for chatting, Mike. Yeah. Okay. On the stream.
Laters.